Welcome to my next installment in my Mini ITX build quest. Mini ITX for me is a very exciting form factor to build a computer. One, for the fact that it's very cost efficient. You can get a lot of function out of a very small box. And secondly, the choice of components now for these devices is getting bigger and bigger, and the cases are also getting better and better as well. For this particular build is a home theater PC build without a TV tuner, just a basic computer but functioning as a home theater computer. I'm using a pretty budget build. This is actually for a friend of mine who wants to add it to his existing home theater environment. Currently using a Blu-ray player but looking to integrate more computer files and technology into that as well. For the build, starting from the bottom left of the picture, the motherboard that I have chosen, which is one that I have now used 4 times before in various builds, is an MSI board, FM2 A75 IAE53. Pretty decent motherboard. It's got the mid-spec chipset, which is the A75 chipset, which pretty much does everything that I need it to do. It supports the AMD APU series processors, or APUs. Takes plenty of RAM, more than I need, has a dedicated graphics slot if it's ever required, not for this particular build though, but does everything very well and pretty well priced. As far as the APU that has been chosen for this build, we've gone mid-range again. It's the AMD A8 6500. It is not an unlocked CPU. Don't plan on unlocking this particular thing or even overclocking for that matter. RAM, we've gone for 4 gigs of Crucial Ballistics, more than sufficient. Just going with the 1 DIMM module at this particular time to see how it runs. If there's any need for an additional 4 gigs, that can be added at a later stage. Storage, we're choosing a solid state drive from SanDisk. It's 128 gigs in units, one of the more basic ones. Basically, they'll be putting the OS and the programs on that. Data storage will be in the way of a Toshiba 3TB 3.5-inch drive. There were options to look at for this particular case, and it took quite a bit of work to understand exactly which the best options were going to be. Natively, the case, which is the Silverstone ML05, only natively supports 2.5-inch drives. Being a home theater environment and obviously big video files and stuff, storage is going to be rather important, which had an impact on what CPU cooler we used and what configuration we took. So what we decided to do was to go with a Noctua CPU cooler. It's one of their low profile series. It's the NH-L9A, which is the AMD variation. There is also a Intel variation which ends with an I as well. The complete height of the CPU cooler off the board is 37 millimeters, which then allows me to use, which I'll show you later in the series, an integrated plate that holds a standard 3.5-inch drive or an optical drive. This allows me enough clearance and also enough room for the Noctua cooler to do its job. So rather than having to go for a collection of 2.5-inch drives, it obviously brought the cost of the actual build up. We opted for 1 3TB drive from Toshiba to fulfill that function. Not sure if I'm going to use them yet or going to have enough room to use them, but we also elected to get 2 80mm case fans as there is room for them. These are from Arctic Cooling. They're F8s. They have PWM controllers in them. So hopefully we can hook that up to the motherboard's integrated software to control those alongside the APU to keep the system nice and quiet. A couple of cables over there. Basically the one is a PWM fan splitter. There's only one case fan which is PWM controlled on the motherboard itself, so that will allow me to hook both those up if the need arises. The only thing that's not here so far for this particular video is the FSX power supply, which I'm still waiting on. That is unfortunately going to be a slightly cheaper unit to keep the cost down of the build. The more branded Silverstone and a couple of other, the Be Quiet ones, are quite a bit more expensive. So we've chosen to get a cheaper unit which will be arriving in a couple of days. It only has one SATA power connector, which is not enough, so that basically is an extra cable there to allow me to put that together. So that's pretty much, there's no optical drive for this build, not required. So what I'll basically do is I'm going to start putting this stuff together on a test bench just to test it outside the case, and then later in the build we'll obviously put that over. For this part of the build, it now requires me to prepare the motherboard for the CPU cooler. During this particular time, I'm also going to be mounting the APU as well as the heatsink from Noctua and the RAM. And then from there I'll be transferring all this over to my test bench. I do prefer to build computers outside the main case first, just to make sure everything works, and then transfer it in afterwards. Basically what needs to be done, Noctua kindly supply a backplate and mounting hardware, as well as the actual fan itself. What needs to be done on the motherboard is that the plastic adapters that would normally take the standard AMD cooler need to be removed, and then we will mount the plate basically in place of this one on the back of the actual motherboard itself. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing now. Okay, what we need to do now, I have successfully removed the standard backplate and mountings for the standard thing that came with the motherboard. I'm now going to insert the APU. I've already lifted the arm, which basically needs to be lifted to allow the CPU, or the actual CPU or APU, whatever you like to call it, into the actual motherboard. You may not notice this, but on the bottom left hand corner there's a little triangle, which basically needs to be lined up with a little triangle on the APU. With the AMD APUs and other CPUs, the pins are located on the actual APU itself, so we need to be pretty careful when we do this. I'm just going to put this in now. Okay, no pressure required whatsoever, just simply drops into place, just making sure, wiggling it around, that everything's in place, and it is. And then I'm going to basically, with any required force, just put the arm back in place. So that's it, that's basically the APU now in place. All that's left for me to do is to take out some of the thermal grease and apply that to the APU before I then put the cooler on. Okay, we're now a little step further. We've now mounted the Noctua low profile cooler as well as the APU obviously underneath that, after applying some thermal grease. Put the backplate on, tightened everything down nice and snug. I've also installed the 1 DIMM, 4 gig DIMM of RAM as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mount this and connect it up to my exterior test bench. Right, so now I've now got everything on my external test bench, so I'm going to put in my USB key from which I'm going to install Windows 8.1, and then I've put all the various drives and connecting cables into the mobile test bench. So I'm going to fire it up now and start to install Windows. Right, so basically I've just spent the last little bit of time setting up everything and installing Windows. Currently setting up, just installing Windows Update. So just starting with Windows 8, and then I'll progress on to updating to 8.1, as I'm also running from an older boot drive. Right, so now I've mounted the motherboard into the case. I've also mounted the 2 fans on the side, which I'll show you in more detail in a second. I've also taken some time just to mount the SSD on the top area of the cage, which is mounted in the front of the case. I hope to use the area below the SSD to route some of the excess cables that come with the power supply. That has now arrived as well. It's an EZ Cool 500 watt SFX power supply. Bit of a cheapie. The guy I'm building this computer for was on a bit of a tight budget, so we went with this, which was about half the price of the next cheapest option. So yeah, that's all done, so I'll show you around the case now. So this is the case. I'm not going to be using an optical drive for this particular build, as we are going to be using the top bracket, which goes over the CPU cooler, to house a 3 terabyte 3.5 inch drive. I've taken a bit of time to carefully route as good as I can the cables from the PVM fans. These are 2 80mm Arctic F8 fans with the PVM monitors in them. I've then got a splitter, which I have used to go down to the motherboard, which allows me to use the 1 PVM header with the 2 fans. So hopefully that's not going to get in the way and we can carry on with this particular build. Well, that was certainly challenging. A very small case to work with, lots of wires, fans, USB 3 headers, big thick cables, front panel headers, SATA cables, PVM splitters, all going into a very small area. I've routed the 24 pin power supply cable against the wall. As I said, the 2.5-inch bay is in there. Power supply is now in. All that I've left basically to do is to install the hard drive on top of the pan, so at least all that area is nice and clean. So pretty straightforward from that point of view. Area from the front of the case, all looking pretty good. Not a lot of room, especially in this one end of the case. The motherboard is laid out quite strangely. I'm just hoping those two 80mm fans are going to have enough effect on the case, because they're quite heavily covered by cables, but I'm pretty sure they'll be okay. Also, a strange thing about this power supply was that I had to mount it with the fan facing down at the bottom of the case to make sure that the cables were long enough. There is, however, a good 15-20mm clearance at the bottom, so you can't really see that well. Bottom of the power supply to the case, so I'm pretty sure there should be enough area in there for it to breathe. This is the 3.5-inch bay mounted on this mounting plate that they basically supply you. That now gets mounted across the top over here, so I'm going to mount that now. Hopefully the cables that I have made available for it are going to be long enough and we shouldn't have any problems. And there it is, complete. I haven't fired it up yet, but I'm sure it'll be okay. I can honestly say with authority that working with this case has been working with something tighter than a duck's backside. Not that I have any real life experience of that either. But yeah, pretty happy with it. Cable routing was as neat as humanly possible to achieve. So yeah, everything worked out pretty neatly. Fans are all free of cables and working pretty nice. As you can see, quite a tight squeeze between the CPU fan and the hard drive case, but I think between that fan and the two 80mm on the other side, we should all be good. So yeah, I'll put it back together again and fire it up and see how we go. So that's it, all started up now. Everything seems to be running quite nicely. The two 80mm fans seem to be moving quite a bit of air actually out of the side of the case, which was quite nice to see. So from that point of view, quite happy with that. I did, as you know, obviously reconfigure and do all the actual Windows configuration earlier in the week, so that's now done. I will have a look at some of the other system stacks as soon as I can. So that's it, we're all done. Everything put back together, everything's working just the way I would expect it to work. Yeah, overall, a good little build, really can't complain, apart from it being quite tight, but I suppose that's normal when it comes to these size factor computers. But yeah, I hope the guy will be quite happy, because I'm quite happy with it. So if you have any comments, as always, just please put them below. Any questions, you can do the same. And yeah, that's me signing out until the next one. Cheers.